If you're watching this, you already know that fossils are one of the coolest things ever. Game Freak realized this and put fossils into Pokemon Red and Blue. Being one of the more unique ways to obtain Pokemon in those games, it only made sense that there would be some attempt to adapt them into the TCG. Fossils have always been a little weird, though. Obviously, people love them because they're cool, and the unique implementation of fossil Pokemon has been a constant throughout the entirety of the game's lifespan. But the mechanic itself has been changed and reworked countless times. Today we're going to talk about the history of the fossil mechanic, when they've succeeded and when they've failed, and what needs to be done to make fossils better. The very first fossils made their appearance in the Fossil expansion. Who would have thought? This is the third main set, released in October of 1999. You'd think that being the namesake of the expansion would ensure that the fossils were powerful cards, but all three fossil Pokemon at the time evolved from the same card, Mysterious Fossil. Mysterious Fossil is a trainer card that can be placed down as a Pokemon. It has 10 HP, and when it's knocked out, your opponent doesn't take any prize cards. So before we go any further, here's your first main issue. Trainer cards have always been far more difficult to search out than regular Pokemon, although admittedly it wasn't as bad this early on. But as a result, getting these fossil Pokemon up and running is inherently less consistent than any other Stage 2. And Stage 2s in general already weren't very good at this time. It didn't help at all that Kabutops and Omastar were honestly a lot worse than most of the Stage 2s we had. I mean, Kabutops to this day is still tied for the lowest HP on any Stage 2 card ever printed. And while they don't give out any prizes, the fossils being only 10 HP means your opponent can very easily deny any fossils from getting set up if they really wanted to. Another smaller loss for the fossils of this era was that Fossil Excavation was never printed in English. In Japan, Fossil Excavation is a trainer card that adds Mysterious Fossil from your deck or your discard pile to your hand. This makes these fossils way more searchable, and means that the 10 HP isn't as rough since you can recover the fossils later without much trouble. Although even a card like this could never salvage Kabutops and Omastar. I could find some very old posts online talking about using the fossils alongside Clefairy to easily fill up your bench to power up Wigglytuff. I see the vision, but something like this I don't think ever saw any real success. You can play a strategy like this if you want, but if your opponent gets lucky even one time with Articuno's Blizzard, all of your bench fossils and Pokédolls are going away, which seems a little too risky to be worth it. Really, the best way to use the fossils was for their intended purpose, to evolve them. While Omastar and Kabutops were really bad for Stage 2s, Aerodactyl is only a Stage 1, and it's way better than both. The prehistoric power Pokemon power simply stops all Pokemon from evolving while Aerodactyl is in play. Again, evolutions weren't the most popular thing in this format when this card came out, but they were at least present. The aforementioned Articuno, for example, relied on Blastoise to actually set up. Aerodactyl prevents Blastoise from hitting the field in the first place, making Articuno a non-issue. That said, as time has gone on, people have continued to realize that the best thing you can do in these early years is just spam strong basic Pokemon. As a result, Aerodactyl has sort of fallen off in popularity. Even worse, the Stadium Chaos Gym would later come around, forcing players to win a coin flip just to play any non-stadium trainer cards. Who designed this? In any case, fossils are also trainer cards, so good luck. This, however, is where we see a bit of hope for Aerodactyl. One of the more popular ways to experience the base set through gym format is through Prop 15.3. Prop 15.3 is a special format created by Wizards of the Coast as an attempt to curtail all of the game-breaking trainer cards in the format, and hopefully make things more enjoyable. It limits players to only 15 trainer cards total and only 3 of each card per deck instead of the usual 4. It's a long story, but this format was only used for one major event before being seen as a failure and fading into obscurity. Years later, people took another look at it and realized this format actually does improve the game significantly. In this format, evolutions are much stronger, giving Aerodactyl another shot at viability. Even though Mysterious Fossil eats into your precious trainer card space, the value an early Aerodactyl provides still makes it a worthy inclusion. If you are interested in exploring this era of the game, I would super recommend checking this format out. I'll probably have a video about Prop 15.3 itself come out eventually, because this is actually a pretty cool format. Even base set Charizard is viable here. Anyway, we're getting off topic. This is pretty much all that the fossils do in this era of the game. Omastar and Kabutops are just so atrocious that Mysterious Fossil is really just the mechanism by which you reach Aerodactyl. This is probably a bit of an underwhelming start to the fossils, getting 3 fully evolved fossil Pokemon, 2 of which being contenders for some of the worst cards ever printed, but Aerodactyl is pretty good. Could be worse. In fact, it's about to get a lot worse because the first set of the Neo era would introduce Slowking. Slowking is a broken card that was grossly mistranslated. When your opponent wants to play a trainer, they must flip a coin. If heads, that card does nothing and goes to the top of the opponent's deck. Originally, this card needed to be in the active to apply this ability, so Slowking's low HP and damage output made this pretty reasonable. However, the mistranslation allows this ability to work on the bench, not only meaning you can have some real progress makers in the active, but you can also play down multiple Slowking to minimize the odds of your opponent successfully using a trainer card. This really was the death knell for an already underwhelming mechanic. There were a few Kabutops as well as a single Omastar and Aerodactyl that came out during this era, but they mostly weren't worth playing, especially under these circumstances. It wasn't until the e-reader set Skyrage that we would get Buried Fossil. This card is a basic Pokemon, not an item, so it doesn't get owned by Slowking, at least. It also has an ability allowing you to trade a basic energy in your hand for an Omanite or Kabuto. We also got the Stadium Underground Lake, letting a player put an Omanite or Kabuto from their discard pile directly onto their bench once per turn. These are all really nice support cards showing a genuine attempt to fix up the fossils. It's just, this still wasn't enough. This time, we can just blame this on the fully evolved fossils being terrible. Neither Crystal nor Shining Pokemon in general saw much success, but Kabutops was somehow blessed with both. As you can imagine, they weren't great. We also got another set of Omastar and Kabutops that, like our first Aerodactyl, locked down evolutions. These Pokebodies only worked while in the active. Omastar prevented your opponent's active Pokemon from evolving, and Kabutops stopped the opponent's bench Pokemon from evolving. These cards are mostly worse than Aerodactyl for several reasons, but they also only locked down your opponent's Pokemon, so there is some merit to these cards. There was also this Aerodactyl which could shut off Pokebodies for a turn while it's in the active, but it didn't see any use from what I could find. While these formats are quite unpopular to go back to, usually players who do go back to the format either play with Slowking errata to use the intended effect, or just with Slowking banned outright. With Slowking gone, things aren't as dire for the fossils. Jason Klaczynski's blog outlines a fossil deck that could be used during this format, built around Steelix. Steelix has a very nice 110 HP on a stage 1. and can take hits even better thanks to Special Metal Energy's damage reducing effect. While that fire weakness does hurt, running a water type like the Kabutops from Neo Discovery can help cover that weakness. Running Kabutops necessitates using Mysterious Fossil and Fighting Energy, but that's not a bad thing. Mysterious Fossil can also evolve into Neo Discovery's Aerodactyl, which lets your evolved Pokemon use the attacks of their pre-evolutions. For 2 Fighting Energy, Steelix can utilize Onix's Rage attack to strike back after Steelix has taken enough damage. Honestly, this is just a really cool combo going on here. I don't have enough experience with this format to tell you if this deck is any good, but at least it looks cool. Overall though, the Neo and E-Reader eras seemed pretty rough for the fossils. Sure, this Kabutops is cool, but keep in mind this is like a rogue deck in a format in which you ban the most powerful card because it was mistranslated. In the context of actual real life events, you can imagine it was a lot worse. Also, I don't know where else to say this, but Buried Fossil being a Pokemon is really weird. It kind of just like betrays the entire thing that makes fossils unique. But it was also just like a one-time thing, so it's just this really weird anomaly that is randomly in the middle of all this. Just really, really strange times. Also, I'm going to take this time now to ask you to subscribe. The vast majority of my viewers are not, and it is literally the single most helpful thing you can do for this channel, so please click the button. It would really help me out a ton. Anyway, when Pokemon took over the international game from Wizards of the Coast at the beginning of the Ruby and Sapphire era, there was a need to spice things up a bit. As the past few formats had been not great, not only did this lead to the introduction of EXs, but Fossils also saw a slight revamp as well. Specifically, the EX Sandstorm set would give us Armaldo and Cradily. Instead of these guys revolving from the same mysterious fossils as the rest, they evolve from their own specialized Claw and Root fossils. These cards greatly outclass the old Mysterious Fossil, having 40 HP, a bonus effect, and still not giving out a prize card. Additionally, by now, creatures had caught on to the fact that fossils are way more difficult to use than regular Pokemon, and locked in by giving them actual good effects. As a result, the fossils in this era were a lot more successful than the ones from earlier eras, although once again, they still struggled to get past rogue status. First of all, fossils did see success in the very early days of the format. For the beginning years of the Advanced era, the early Ruby and Sapphire sets were legal alongside some of the later Wizards era sets. This meant access to the fossil support from the E-Reader era without any of the item lock cards that come from the Neo era. Remember the Kabutops and Omastar that lock your opponent out of evolving? Well, Cradily EX also prevents the opponent's active from evolving as long as it's in the active, making it just a better Omastar. Combine that with ATM Rock, which devolves the opponent's whole board, and you have a very annoying deck. Shigeru Kanda was able to pilot a deck using Cradily EX and Kabutops together to lock the opponent out of evolutions and win the 2004 Japan National Championships. This event in general was just weirdly good for the fossils. There's also this Armaldo Claydol deck which got third. I don't have a deck list for this, I don't know what the game plan is supposed to be, but this Armaldo shuts both players out of support as well as in the active, so you can imagine a deck that can set it up consistently could be quite terrifying. Throughout the advanced era, there would be quite a few strong fossils printed. Since the specific era of the game is one that people love to look back on, we've seen a lot of experimentation with these fossil cards. There are a wide variety of fossil decks in the format, and some of them have seen some pretty good success. Cards like Strange Cave and Hull on Fossil maybe aren't the most powerful or most reliable, but they're good enough support to make the very powerful fossil cards just that much more consistent. Plus, many of the stage 1 fossils had attacks that helped set up other fossils, which went a long way for enabling full-on fossil decks. There are way too many to cover here, but I do want to go over a couple of cool ones. A player named Maxi Boy saw decent success in an online RSPK tournament with this fossil deck. There were just so many different fossils printed in this era that you could kind of mix and match however you want. 2 different Omanites, 2 different Omastar, 2 different Kabuto, 4 copies of this one Kabutops because it's kind of crazy, and then 1 Delta Species Aerodactyl with an Aerodactyl EX. We're not even playing Mysterious Fossil here, we're just using Hull on Fossil, Strange Cave, and the attacks of our other fossils to get set up. Only 2 startable basics in the whole deck seems rough, though I guess starting with Solrock or Lunatone makes it easier to establish the other and get their Pokebodies online. In any case, the main thing here is that this is a real, full-blown fossil deck. There's no other attackers, only slight support from Solrock and Lunatone, and maybe Hull and Magneton if you count that, but if you like fossil Pokemon, this is a deck that you'd like to try out. And if you like ruining people's days, this is a deck that you would like to try out. Jason Klaczynski's blog outlines this Armaldo deck, which is really funny to me. You simply want to get Sableye out early, use Limitation to stop them from using supporters for 1 turn, and keep using that attack every turn until Armaldo hits the board to lock your opponent out of supporters permanently. This seems like a very beatable gimmick, to be honest, and if you don't get Sableye up and attacking early, you are kind of cooked. So I don't think this deck is really any good, but if you're playing this, there might be things more important to you than just winning the game. Lastly, here's an Armaldo Groudon deck, played by a player named Little Slinky16. We do have the supporter locked in Armaldo, but we also have Armaldo EX, which becomes part grass if it has a React Energy attached. Since we're using React Energy, we might as well fit this Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl has the Pokebody reactive protection, an attack called Power Blow, and another attack called Speed Stroke. Wow, they really went 3 for 3 on this one. Anyway, by once again relying on Strange Cave, we can ensure that our only startable basic is the almighty Groudon EX, which seems like a pretty nice Pokemon to start with. This deck especially I think is really cool. However, before we go too deep into the fossil decks, we need to rewind. Specifically, we need to go back to the 2004 World Championships, where fossils would see the highest level of success up on the world stage. The 2004 World Championships might be one of the funniest competitive Pokemon events ever held, primarily because seemingly the entirety of Japan found out that Team Magma was an insane deck, while the vast majority of players elsewhere hadn't quite caught on. This is the only time the same deck won all 3 age divisions of Worlds, and the top cut of Masters Division kind of speaks for itself. But hey, Americans can cook too. In 8th place is this very funny Wailord deck piloted by Colin Mole. Wailord EX had a monstrous 200 HP. The Oddish line let you evolve into either this Blossom, which heals 20 damage from Wailord each turn, or Vileplume. While Bulbapedia says this is Vileplume EX, I'm pretty sure they're wrong. Every other source states that this is the Vileplume from Expedition, which can poison the opponent on a coin flip. Not only does this help you deal an extra bit of damage while you're healing up your Wailord, but remember that statusing the opponent also shut off Pokepowers in most cases, so there is a lot of value in this 50% chance to poison each turn. In any case, Wailord itself can use Super Deep Dive to heal up 30 damage and hide away on the bench, and if you had enough HP, Dwindling Wave could OHKO the vast majority of the format. Now, you may have already noticed, but this deck is playing 10 fossil cards. These cards are not here to evolve at all. No, they're here for Wailord to hide behind since your opponent won't take any prizes for knocking them out. Unfortunately, as much as I love Wailord and this deck, this would really screw the fossils over. Starting with the Diamond and Pearl era, the fossils now give up prize cards when knocked out. And while I can't prove it, I believe Wailord is likely to blame. This is a massive nerf, as now the fossils are unequivocally worse than the standard basic Pokemon. That prize denial was kind of all that they had. The Diamond and Pearl era also said goodbye to the old mysterious fossil, instead introducing new Helix and Dome fossils, which could evolve immediately when an energy was attached to them. However, the first new Kabutops saw no play at all, and the first new Omastar was actually used with the older mysterious fossil instead. You see, Omastar devolves the opponent's board when it's put into play. Instead of going through the trouble of attaching an energy onto a Pokemon you're only playing for its ability, you would just use rare candy on the fossil to throw down Omastar right away. Thus, the prize denial of Mysterious Fossil was far more valuable. Plus, the latter part of the Advanced era saw Mysterious Fossil buffed to have 50 HP, making it just that much safer. During this era of the game, rare candy could be used on any Pokemon, even on the turn you put it into play, so if your deck was playing Omastar, you just run one Mysterious Fossil, one Omastar, and some amount of rare candy, completely foregoing Omanite altogether. Unfortunately, this isn't the best start to this new era of fossils. Things looked like they would turn around once we finally got to the Platinum era. The Arceus set was especially nice, giving us an Aerodactyl, Omastar, and Kabutops with insane synergy with one another. These are very cool cards. Kabutops can swing for 70 damage if you discard a fossil from your hand, which was really good damage for just one energy. Omastar could swing for greater damage if you had tons of fossils in your discard pile, and Aerodactyl could add any fossil from your deck to your hand. This time the fossils had the potential to be a serious competitive deck, except Spiritomb is also in this set. The Spiritomb from Arceus locks both players out of trainers as long as it's in the active. Once again, the fossils are trader cards. I wish I could say more, I really, truly do, but Spiritomb was played at 4 copies in one of the best decks in this format. What do you want me to say? This is just a total death sentence for the fossils. I think anyone can tell you with this card running around, there's no chance for these poor little guys. These were also the last fossils we got for a while, since none were printed during the Heart Gold and Soul Silver era. We would luckily see the fossils again in the Black and White era. This time, they went for a totally new approach. Let's check out the new cover fossil, for example. This card says, look at the bottom 7 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Tirtuga you find there and put it onto your bench. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck. What? Why? This is, by the way, the only way to get Tirtuga or any other fossil Pokemon into play. Good luck. And to be clear, that does mean that any Tirtuga you have is pretty much useless in your hand. The only exception to this is the Stadium Twist Mountain, which does let you bench a restored Pokemon from your hand, but only on a coin flip, and also only once per turn. Are you joking? This is literally just worse Strange Cave. This almost feels like a cruel joke by someone who despises the fossils for some reason. There's very few good ways to put any of the fossil Pokemon on the bottom of your deck too. Every fossil from this era is pretty much unplayable because of how badly they messed up the fossil mechanic here. There is one kind of half exception though. Archeops from Noble Victories has the exact same ability as Aerodactyl. It completely shuts out evolutions. Because of the terrible fossil mechanics though, this card saw 0 play in Standard. Years later, Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, yes that's its actual name, came out. This card lets you cheat out any fighting Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench. Suddenly, there was a very easy way to play Archeops. By cheating the fossil mechanics, this card became way too strong. Both Archeops and later on Maxie would be banned from the expanded format. The XY era kept fossils the same for some reason, so of course they still sucked. Fossil Researcher could let you play Tyrant and Aurora straight from the deck, but that's not even close to enough, especially because the Tyrantum and Aurorus just weren't very good. It doesn't help at all that these cards would come around in the same set as Seismitoad EX, whose Quaking Punch, once again, item locks, and these cards are, once again, unplayable. This era of fossils was by far the worst iteration. Fetching from the bottom 7 is just so random. Some of the restored Pokemon had abilities to put themselves from the discard pile on the bottom of the deck, which is kind of helpful, but really, the fossils just should have fetched these cards from the discard pile directly. Fates Collide would give us a few better fossils, but they weren't nearly enough to be playable, and I quite frankly don't want to waste any time talking about these cards. This is just a total departure from what we were used to, and it's just so much worse. I cannot believe this version of the fossils stuck around for as long as it did. The Sun and Moon era would revamp fossils again, this time giving us kind of a return to form. We're back to benching item cards now, We have exactly one fossil, the unidentified fossil. Every single fossil Pokemon evolves from this card. It doesn't have an ability like the Diamond and Pearl era cards, but what these fossils did get was actual proper support. Fossil Excavation Map is the same as the old Japan exclusive Fossil Excavation, getting a fossil from your deck or discard to your hand. But far more importantly here is the Pokemon Research Lab. This stadium gets 2 fossil Pokemon straight from your deck, skipping any need to evolve them up first. This does end your turn, but a card like this is kind of necessary for a deck running a wide variety of fossils since you only have 4 unidentified fossils to properly evolve from. Letting you get your fossils out under item lock is also a very nice bonus. In fact, this card is so good that people would play it while forgoing the unidentified fossil entirely. Unfortunately though, the most popular way to use the fossils was with 1 unidentified fossil, 1 Omastar, and some amount of rare candy. Seem familiar? Omastar locks your opponent out of items provided you have less Pokemon in play than they do. The supporter card Green's Exploration is kind of broken, getting you 2 trainer cards, which can include another copy of itself, just so long as you have no ability Pokemon in play. Using this, you can search out the fossil and the rare candy. Sure, having Omastar disables Green's Exploration once it's set up, but if you're item locking your opponent like this, you probably won't need Green to win the game. Depending on the deck, you could also use Fossil Research Lab, Omanite, and Omastar instead, but it's all for the same end goal. There were, however, some decks willing to use the fossils a little more honestly. Aerodactyl, if you had no EX or GX Pokemon in play, could swing for 180 for 3 colorless. That cost is paid in full thanks to triple acceleration energy, allowing this card to see use in single prize decks, of which there were admittedly very few, but still. The later Sun and Moon era was kind of dominated by the tag teams, extremely powerful 3 prize basics. Fossils of all things were actually able to put up something of a fight against them. I don't want to overstate how good the fossils were. They weren't meta by any means, but they finally had a coherent game plan now and were capable of seeing success in the hands of a good enough player. Renaud Levain piloted this list to a 6th place finish at the Bockham Regionals. Aerodactyl GX makes the opponent's basic Pokemon's attacks cost a colorless more, while Caracosta shut down opposing tool cards. Ideally, things like this could slow your opponent down enough for you to set up your main attacker, Rampardos. Getting 3 fighting on Rampardos was a bit of a tall order, but would immediately KO any tag team staring it down, netting you an easy 3 prizes. A clean hit does 120 damage to evolution Pokemon, which doesn't seem like very much, but I suppose it's some kind of strategy into the few evolution decks you might run into. Your primary obstacle with a deck like this though was that it was just way too slow. You were very much relying on taking 2 big knockouts on tag team Pokemon to win the game. Not only did you kind of fold a single prize and perhaps even 2 prize decks, but Arceus and Dialga and Palkia's GX's altered creation allowed for its user to take an extra prize card for each knockout, which just made using single prize decks very difficult in general. Still, this is probably the best the fossils have ever been, with the only serious competition for the title being the Advanced era. Crazy how far some actual good supports can take you. Of course, the fossil Pokemon having strong attacks and abilities was also very important. Unfortunately, the Sword and Shield era was not as kind to the fossils. The new set of 4 introduced in Gen 8 evolved from Rare Fossil, which has 10 more HP than Unidentified Fossil, and that's it. The only support these fossils would get is Keralis, a card that let you grab 2 Rare Fossil from your deck. I mean, this is just nothing, isn't it? Like, the 4 lovable abominations from Sword and Shield were generally not great cards, although some were kind of interesting. It doesn't matter. Nobody played any of them, just an absolute flop after Sun and Moon did everything right. There was one fossil Pokemon that saw serious play during this era, that being Archeops. Archeops' Primal Turbo ability would accelerate 2 special energy from your deck to one of your Pokemon in play. This is obviously a very powerful ability, but this card kind of feels like an insult more than anything else, as it seems pretty apparent that this card was never intended to be brought out normally. You see, this card saw tons of play alongside Lugia V-Star, whose star summoning ability placed 2 cardless Pokemon without rule boxes from your discard pile onto your bench. How convenient that this card is our first and only cardless type Archeops. Lugia V-Star was a tier 0 deck at one point, and Archeops was necessary to make it work. However, you wouldn't even play Arcan in this deck, so I don't think this really counts. And for those keeping track, this is now the 2nd time an Archeops card has facilitated a broken strategy because of another card that cheats it out. In the same set that gave us Lugia and Archeops, we also got Omastar V. Omastar was the one other piece of fossil support in the Sword and Shield era. Its attack benched 2 Pokemon that evolved from a fossil, including Rare Fossil, right from the deck. Now, ignoring the fact that this attack on an otherwise weak 2 prizer is just a marginally better Fossil Research Lab, I do kind of like this card. This card was, in fact, bad. It never saw any high-level success, don't get me wrong, but it could be used to fetch Arcan, which could then evolve into Archeops manually. This is still literally just worse Lugia, but it's also way funnier. Still, reality can't be ignored here. The fossils were terrible, and the one good fossil being cheated out from the discard pile feels a little like a slap in the face. That brings us to today. The Scarlet and Violet era revamped fossils again, making them closest to how they were in the Diamond and Pearl era, with each fossil having its own individual fossil item with a unique ability. Still, these cards haven't seen any real use. Here the reason is quite simple. Not only are the fossils themselves kind of bad, but there also just isn't any good support for them. By the time we started getting fossils with good effects, Badoo had already come around, and once again, item locks the fossils, and we all know how that goes. Still, there is some hope. Our Pitch Black set will give us Fossil Quarry, a stadium card that benches any 2 fossils directly from the deck. I already love this card. This doesn't skip the fossil stage entirely like Research Lab, but it also doesn't end your turn, meaning you can get a continuous stream of fossils even after you're set up and attacking. And since this benches them directly from the deck, it dodges item lock, which only stops items from being played from the hand. You may have already noticed that a lot of the decks we covered today didn't even play the item cards for the fossils at all. Instead, they would just opt for other cards that directly play their evolutions. It's honestly crazy that it took nearly 30 years just to get a good piece of fossil support that actually encourages engaging with the gimmick the fossils are based around. I feel pretty confident in saying that this card alongside the new Fastodon and Rampardos EX are really cool, but just not quite enough. When it comes to what the fossils need to be meta, Fossil Quarry is honestly the perfect piece of support. I can't think of any real improvements here. Now the issue is just the fossil Pokemon themselves. A lot of the current fossils are interesting, just a little bit underwhelming. Another really strong stage 2 fossil, or perhaps just a good stage 1 that provides more consistency to the fossil deck, could go a long way in making fossils viable. But we will have about 2.5 years of Fossil Quarry being legal in the standard format, so hopefully within that time frame we can get some good cards that bring the fossils up to the meta status they truly deserve. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and most importantly, comment which fossil Pokemon is your favorite and why it's the Omanite from Legend Maker. Thank you.